Here we are for another round of the 70s versus the 90s, and it's loners trying to fit in with society when I put Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver against Ben Stiller's The Cable Guy. And woo, this one was a wild one to get through. So let's just dive right on in. First up, we have Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver, which is one of the greatest films of all time, not just of his filmography, but especially of the 70s. And one of Robert De Niro's most chilling performances. It might even be his greatest performance. I don't know. But the film itself, a great script by Paul Schrader, and also the last score that Bernard Herrmann ever did for a film. Of course, he was most notable for doing a bunch of Alfred Hitchcock films, and this was the last one and probably his greatest score. And so basically, the title pretty much sums it up. The film centers around a taxi driver in New York City, and played by Robert De Niro, who, like I said, is one of his most intense performances of all this. This is the film that basically announced De Niro as a powerhouse. Of course, like, he had other films, like prior to this, he did Mean Streets and Godfather Part 2, among other films as well. But this one just really showed how far De Niro could go, and honestly, it wasn't even as far as he would go and thing. But the film itself is it has such a fucking distaste for society. It just shows like the society just decaying, basically. And we see this lone man, God's lonely man, as he calls himself. And of course, like most Scorsese films, this does have a voiceover, and it's basically the voiceover is the character Travis Bickle, played by Robert De Niro, writing in his diary all the shit that he sees. Of course, he gets a job as a taxi driver because he can't sleep, and the porno theaters ain't doing it for him. Like, he'll just go to porno theaters just to kill time because he can't sleep and stuff. And this dude is, he's been in Vietnam, and he's desperately trying to cling on to what's left of society. He's trying to connect in the best way that he can, but he's such an outsider in this sick, sad world, so to speak. And he tries to woo Sybil Shepherd, who works at a fucking campaign place for the candidate Palantine and stuff, played by Leonard Harris. And of course, she's got a little workplace, suitor, I guess you could call it, because Albert Brooks in the film, he's supposed to be that office funny guy, and of course, like, he definitely wants to nail Sybil Shepherd but can't. And then after that fails, because he fucks that up by taking her to a porno theater, thinking a lot of couples go here, but she it wasn't her bag. And so he writes her off as just another fucking diseased vessel of the sick society. And then like by chance meets this 12-year-old prostitute played by Jodie Foster, who gets into his cab one night. She's trying to get away, but then her pimp, played by Harvey Keitel, his name's Sport in the film, takes her away, and then he gets all hung up on rescuing her from these fucking degenerates and stuff. And so after he fails to kill the fucking senator guy that's running for president and stuff, then he decides, like, oh, fuck it, I'll just kill these pimps, the fucking child fucking sex ring people and shit. And so he does that. He fucking shoots up this whole apartment building where they hold court with all that shit and stuff, and ends up becoming a hero. Like, had he killed the Senate, now that in and of itself is something to say about society, because had he killed the political candidate, he would have been, labeled a monster. But he kills all these fucking pimps and, fucking child slave ring owners and shit. And, like, he's a hero, And now he's finally found his way to not only be noticed in society, but to be accepted in society, a crusading taxi driver and shit, And the film is a slow build. Like, it definitely, we see this man just try to be normal in society, but he can't get it, no, at every turn, because he's a bit silly, might be a little off in the head. You don't really see any of his backstory. You hear about his military service and stuff, but he doesn't really talk about that. I think even he himself doesn't really know who he is. He's just desperately clinging on to some old ideals and just trying to navigate his way through a changing world that he doesn't really recognize, an open sewer, as he calls it, and stuff. And what makes this film great too is, like, of course, probably the best script Paul Schrader ever wrote. Also, you had a director, Martin Scorsese, who fully understood the material and was ready to take the material to a whole other level. Like those little side play side fucking shots of like that guy with the Gene Krupa syncopated style, all that shit. That's what it brings, an atmosphere of New York. Nobody really like filmed New York the way Scorsese filmed New York. He was from there, and of course he had a deep love for where he came from, and definitely well documented on the screen. And he even has a couple of Hitchcockian cameos. One where he doesn't say anything, he's just sitting there watching the Sybil Shepherd walk by, and then another one where he's going to plays a guy that's going to kill his wife because she's cheating on him, with a 44 Magnum. It is kind of triggers, that in that scene with the gun salesman, that shit's fucking brilliant. The way the shots and everything, it's just Scorsese was pure cinema, and that ending shootout scene is one of the best things that he's ever shot, or put together. It's just fucking brilliant. And then of course we move forward to Ben Stiller's The Cable Guy, which probably the second film that Ben Stiller directed. I think Reality Bites was the first one, and of course Ben Stiller is one of the greatest comedic people of all time. Dude can do it all. He can act, he can direct, he can even write and stuff. And this film, Jim Carrey is the title character of The Cable Guy, and this dude is more than a little off. We see in the opening credit sequence where Matthew Broderick is waiting on the cable guy to show up, and then fucking dude just shows up unhinged right out of the gate and stuff. But this is another guy that I guess we could call him incels for lack of a better word. But this guy's clearly been like raised on television. His parents neglected him and let the TV raise him up as best that it could and stuff. But it clearly fucked him up beyond all repair. So he's just desperately looking for a friend. And then he clings on to Matthew Broderick's character, who's, he's going through a breakup with the lovely Leslie Mann and stuff. And he's trying to fucking get that shit back together. But then, like, the more they hang out, the more crazy this motherfucker, like, seems and shit, like that basketball game. Like, and the thing about it is, what's brilliant about The Cable Guy is the fact that Jim Carrey can mix, like, comedy and fucking, like, sadness and shit. It's a real comedy tragedy type thing. And that fucking karaoke sequence where he's singing Somebody to Love, that is one of the funniest but also most heartbreaking scenes that I've ever seen in a fucking movie, because you really see in the face, like he's all silly with his rubber face and shit, but you can see in the eyes just a fucking heartbreak of like he's really pouring out his heart and soul in this karaoke. Fucking tell me you haven't seen that before in any fucking like karaoke bar where like somebody is really putting their 110% into it, to letting it all out and shit, and he's got all, and that fucking medieval time sequence is fucking hilarious. Janine Garofalo is the fucking winch, like that fucking hilarious. Yeah, but they had Pepsi. There's just a lot of moments in this film, and it has a lot to say, not just about society, but how much society is ruled by television, especially at that time. And this was like way before the fucking bullshit. This was basically the dawn of all of that shit, where like, you flash forward like nearly 30 years later and we're even more fucked than we were, where like the worst thing used to be cable television. Now it's the internet and shit. And the fucking film would have been better though, because it starts off so fucking strong, but the film would have been a lot better had they not just stuck with the fucking basic fucking crazy tropes. Had they fucking went to where like, the cable guy really just ruins fucking Matthew Broderick's life and, just like completely just destroys him to where it kind of flips, where like now the cable guy is the cool guy and now Matthew Broderick's fucking insane and he's trying to fuck. Now that would have been way more brilliant, but that ending kind of left me cold. That's why Taxi Driver takes this round, because like that ending of Taxi Driver is just chilling, with the fact that it's like, this guy was going to kill, he was a cunt hair away from killing the political guy and would have been a monster and then, been in jail and shit. But then it decides, I'll just kill these fucking pimps that are whoring out little kids and shit. And now I'm a hero, that kind of vigilante style shit. Because the thing, and it's not really like with the cable guy, we see like Jim Carrey's character do a lot of fucking crazy shit just to fit in. He really wants to be friends with Matthew Broderick, but when that shit takes a turn, he goes full crazy. And he does fuck up his life to a certain extent, but I feel like they could have went further. What started out as something brilliant kind of shit the bed in the third act, but a lot of funny moments and stuff. And even with Taxi Driver, there's a lot of funny moments. I saw this film with an audience one time and they laughed harder than any other fucking comedy I had seen in the movie, which I don't says even more about how fucked up society is. But Taxi Driver takes the round. It's not only a classic, but it goes where it needs to go. You know, just that whole, even the fact that he was trying to kill himself, and then that whole, that shit, man. Just he was just ready to die. You know, he's like that fucking get the fucking mohawk and shit, and he's fucking ready to fucking, you know, he's going to war and shit. So for anybody keeping score, that is 49 to 41. 70s are up by 8. You know, the 90s will come back, but then the 70s will fucking bam. Because I mean, they got classics like this, you know, and like stuff like The Cable Guy, like had a chance to like be even more. Like the fact that if you could have really found that balance of comedy and drama, it would have fucking blew Taxi Driver right out of the fucking water. Because that's one thing that a lot of people don't talk about when it comes to Scorsese is his brilliant balance of comedy and drama. Because Taxi Driver is a good example of that, where there's a lot of comedy in the film, but it's a very serious, bleak film that has no hope in sight. Because even the end, you know, you kind of see him snap. He's like, you know, he's got another snap left in him, and then when you see in that rear view mirror sequence and shit, and they do a similar thing in The Cable Guy, where it's like when he's in the helicopter after he falls on the fucking satellite thing, it's like, are you really my buddy type thing, and it's like, but that could go either way. There's no telling, but you know, like the Taxi Driver is looking for another target, and that's 49 to 41, 70s up by 8. If I've said anything wrong, anything you disagree with, feel free to eviscerate me in the comments. This shit's all open forum. I don't care. This is a rough draft to a doctoral thesis. You know, I have a scientific curiosity I created for myself, documented, so it's all fucking there and whatnot. This shit don't mean anything other than some bullshit fucking numbers to me, and maybe if you like it, who cares? I don't know. 70s versus the 90s, this shit is heating up. I could have been right all this time. 70s is the greatest decade of all time, but we still got a lot of boogieing to do before we figure that out.